So I was playing Pokemon Scarlet and Violet recently, and although I did end up actually really enjoying the game, I, alongside apparently the rest of the internet, was not that enthusiastic about the graphics. So then I was like, Unreal looked good, Pokemon looked bad. Must be pretty good, right? No. So the thing I had to sort out right away before anything else was how to take the Pokemon out of the game and put them into the engine where they can look all nice and stuff. Turns out, not so easy. So for the sake of everyone else's sanity, I wish I could save mine, I'm gonna keep this as brief as possible. Just know that I had to go through some really old looking forums and several Discord channels where I must say the people were surprisingly helpful, just so that I could in total use a physical copy of the game, an SD card reader, and 4 different pieces of ancient looking software just so I could get one model from the game into the engine. Which immediately brought me to the next thing. What area am I even going to remake? Pokemon as a franchise has been around for a long time at this point, and so it has a lot of interesting locations to choose from. In the end, I decided on remaking Sky Pillar from Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. I actually don't remember why this was what I decided to do, so... Anyway, now that I had that in mind, I could reference Bulbapedia to get the data on which Pokemon spawn in each location to figure out what Pokemon I needed to put in the game. Sounds simple, right? I mean, that part was easy enough, but at the end of that, all I had were just some models and animations. On their own, they don't do anything. I mean, they look like they do something, but they don't do anything. There's no game yet here. So then I had to ask myself a question. What is Pokemon? It's battling. I cut you off there, it's battling. There's no philosophical question here, it's battling. It's like 90% of the game. Which means 2 things. There's gonna be a lot of programming, and there's gonna be a lot of UI. That means it's onto the programming. I actually had a lot of fun programming this game, simply because when things start to work, it's just nice. I mean, really, it's almost like Pokemon was designed around object-oriented programming, or one aspect in particular, inheritance. See, what inheritance does is it allows you to create one base child class or template, and have a bunch of what are called child classes inherit from that template so that you don't ever have to copy and paste your code. I know that probably sounds like nothing to a lot of you, so I'm gonna break it down the best I can. Imagine you're making, in this case, a couple of toys. When you're coding in a game engine, what you essentially want to be doing is making the mold that produces the toys in this video. Meaning that all of the common traits that every Pokemon shares, like how their stats are calculated, the moves they can use, how they work inside of a battle, and much, much more, are all going to be included in this base or parent class, which is the mold in this video. The toys are going to be the child classes which I mentioned earlier, which inherit their traits from the parent class. So when I create a Pokemon, all I need to specify is what model and animations it should use, as well as what level, type, and moves they have access to out of the list, and the same code will work for every Pokemon. All I have to do from there is go into the child classes themselves and set the value of those various attributes. That might sound really complicated, but trust me, programming is a lot of the time simpler than it seems to be. Anyway, all of that coding just defines how I should create a Pokemon. It says nothing about how the battle should operate, it says nothing about your team's health and stats and how to keep track of it, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Real quick, I wanted to mention how I coded whether or not certain types were effective against one another. See, every Pokemon type has strengths and weaknesses, but you knew that already, I would hope. What you should do with this information though to use it in an engine is to make a data table, like an Excel spreadsheet. Unfortunately though, that's cringe. Instead, take a look at one of the biggest switch statements to ever be made. I don't want to bore you guys with too much more programming, so I'm going to keep this brief. Every so often, based on the amount of steps you take, a battle will start. The battle can end when you run, catch, or defeat the enemy Pokemon. Or I guess lose, but we don't do that around here. See, something about coding for too long in a row makes you start to have funny little ideas. Like this idea, for instance, where I decided to make all the Pokemon ragdoll when you beat them. They just stay like that forever. The World Cup is topical right now. Here's a clip of Sableye getting kicked like a soccer ball. But that's not all. For some reason, I also thought it would be hilarious if when Claydol used Explosion, he... well... and the pieces just stay there. It's... well, I don't really know how to feel about it, to be honest. Good news! Now that I've successfully destroyed everyone's childhood, it's time to move on to the environment. That's right, we're finally done talking about coding. I skipped the UI coding just for you. Don't tell anybody else about it. I got you. Now that the game was functionally almost complete, I had to go remake the actual Sky Pillar environment, which meant this cave below as well as the island everything else is on. So I started by using Unreal Engine's water plugin to create an island in the middle of the ocean, and then spent some time making sure I couldn't run into the water with some invisible walls. Next I made the cave using the Quixel Bridge mesh assets in order to build out the whole thing. That was a tongue twister. This is where I ran into the first instance of a problem that would become a much bigger issue later on, which is namely that the way that Pokemon games use 3D space makes no sense whatsoever. For instance, the way that this cave is laid out on the inside doesn't actually line up with the surface above. which doesn't matter in the game because they're loaded as 2 distinct zones, but when you're trying to make one 3D environment, you gotta make some changes. So now there's some stairs at the end here that lead up to the desert area where the actual pillar is. Speaking of, I had to make that next. So I used a mixture of Unreal's 3D modeling suite and some Megascans textures to build out the tower, and then put some awesome platforming in the interior to make it a little interesting to play. And by the way, this is where that problem I just mentioned comes back in a very annoying way. See, when you fight Rayquaza in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, the top of Sky Pillar is seen to be above the clouds. Now, something that people might not know is that clouds are actually very high up. I know, crazy, right? See, the issue is that in the games, the player only has to climb up 4 ladders, and somehow the last one takes them up to the height of the clouds, which for reference is about 6,000 feet. So if we take the average height of a 10-year-old and use that to figure out how tall these ladders are, we get a staggering number. This last ladder the player climbs up is at least 5,952 feet long. But in any case, it really sucks for me. I couldn't really find a way to do this without making it ridiculous. I didn't want to copy and paste the same tower like 50 times. So I decided to put a little triangle-shaped teleporter at the top that takes you to where Rayquaza is. Speaking of, I made a really cool cutscene for this. So then you can walk up to Rayquaza, fight, catch, or beat it if you want, as per usual, and that's about it. So there you go, that's what Pokemon would look like with some higher quality textures and sadness. But anyway, you should probably like and subscribe and stuff, because I'm like super awesome. Bye.